Welcome back to the final installment of the How to Defeat Every Phantom Troupe Member series. Since it's the third installment, I'll entirely skip the preamble and get right to it. Let's open things up with Kalluto Zoldyck. Kalluto is a manipulator and a recent addition to the troupe. At about 12 years old, he probably broke the record for becoming the youngest troupe member so far. Bear in mind, the original members were in their mid-teens when they officially became the Spider. While super impressive, this does mean that he's by far the least experienced, skilled, and physically capable troupe member. We saw a good portion of the troupe versus Chimera Ant fight from his perspective, and Kalluto basically spent the whole excursion gawking in awe of the troupe's capabilities, being unable to properly follow Phaeton's and Zazan's movements throughout their bout. In terms of general physical stats, but especially strength and durability, I'd put him either on the level of, or even slightly below, Troupe. Kalluto, being a manipulator with an unimpressive 60% affinity 4 enhancement, doesn't help either. Despite his subpar affinity for it, enhancement plays a huge role in Kalluto's skill set. His Hatsu, Dance of the Serpent's Bite, allows Kalluto to control thousands of enhanced paper confetti to swarm his opponents with. His general tactic is that he first pelts the opponent with unenhanced confetti to ascertain their weak points by observing where on their bodies the confetti has stuck. He then gathers the confetti so that it forms into the vague appearance of a serpent, enhances them with Shu, and proceeds to attack the opponent's weak spot. Whether or not him attacking the specific section of an opponent to which a paper stuck is a go-to strategy of his or a limitation to boost his enhancement capabilities is unclear, but I personally favor the interpretation of it indeed being a limitation. The Hatsu is essentially a mix of Conan from Naruto and Byakuya from Bleach. However, unlike Byakuya's Senbon Sakura, which usually entails a death by 1,000 cuts, Dance of the Serpent's Bite is far more focused, aiming for specific points of an opponent's body. Having the focus of his ability be precision rather than pure destructive power makes sense owing to Kalluto being a manipulator. So, what ability and skill set should our imagined challenger have in order to be a particularly good matchup for Kalluto's own? As usual, we've got a few options. A blitz-based enhancer akin to Nobunaga, just of course scaled down to Kalluto's level of non-proficiency and mastery, could possibly get a jump on him and simply not allow Kalluto to fully utilize his Hatsu, since he relies on physical confetti that he needs to spread out before manipulating. While Kalluto's Shu is strong enough to casually cut steel wire and shouldn't be taken lightly, an actual enhancer would be able to tank or dodge a manipulator's blows and take them on in a 1v1 melee with relative ease, particularly if they do not have the chance to activate their Hatsu. However, that's a bit boring. The next two options are much more fun. One of Kalluto's biggest counters is none other than the man he was in awe of, namely Phaeton and his rising sun. Why? Well, because as established, Kalluto either as a preferred tactic or limitation aims to dismantle his opponents piecemeal rather than going in for the kill. His sadistic personality doesn't help either. All these elements make him almost the ideal opponent for the counteractive and damage-reliant Rising Sun. While our hypothetical challenger would be borrowing Phaeton's Hatsu and Blitz's skill set, he won't be anywhere close to his level, of course, since he's scaling with Kalluto. This, of course, also means that Rising Sun won't be anywhere as powerful as Phaeton's. But it really doesn't need to be. Phaeton's Sun was already absolute overkill against someone as insanely durable as Zazan, meaning that as little as 30% of what we saw him use against Zazan would be more than enough to turn Kalluto into a nuclear blast shadow. The fact that Kalluto uses paper confetti as his weapon, which isn't really the ideal matchup against fire, isn't great either. Now, Phaeton's Hatsu and skill set are all well and good, but let me blow your mind with the objectively best way to ruin Kalluto's day. Shizuku's Belenki. I am very serious. Kalluto's paper confetti are physical objects, not conjured constructs, meaning that Blinky can suck them all in. We saw during her battle with Pike that Blinky's vacuuming power has a decent range, which combined with the rapid rate of suction means that Kalluto will be out of confetti before he knows it, at which point it'd be a vacuum cleaner versus a paper fan. And while I don't value Blinky's offensive power to say the least, all our hypothetical combatant would need to do is draw blood from Kalluto in a few spots, and it would be game over. In all seriousness though, Rising Sun is the better option, since it doesn't offer the opportunity for escape unless you know it's coming, while Blinky doesn't have a surefire way of preventing escape. Unless Shizuku can ask it to suck in someone's hair or something, which I doubt. Moving on. Let's now tackle the My Little Mass Murderer can't be this cute character trope that is Shalnark. Shal is ranked 10th in terms of physical strength, placing him at the very top of the physically weaker tier of Phantom Troupe members. Nonetheless, this level of strength is already a league or two above the majority of professional hunters. As such, while his physical prowess may not be his strong suit, he is no slouch either. Though it has to be said that while his physical stats may be quite decent for his proficiency bracket, his overall combat prowess does leave something to be desired. He's basically never seen engaging enemies directly, preferring to wage battle through a manipulated individual. The one time we do see him engage an opponent directly was Boki's controlled chimera ant, Pell, who he just barely outmaneuvered and managed to pierce with his needle, only to realize that Pell was already being manipulated by Boki, meaning that Shal was unable to take control of him. I mean, I know the guy was unlucky, but had Boki decided to go for the kill after Shal thought he was home free, he could have killed him right then and there. Also, in trying to take control of Pell, Shal was actually slightly injured, making him the only PT member to have actually suffered an injury against their chimera and opponent, barring Phaeton, of course. Now, Shal is a coercive manipulator whose ability, Black Voice, allows him to take full control of anyone he pierces with his needle. The needle has to be embedded either near or in the target's nape, in order for the ability to activate. This was all but confirmed during his aforementioned battle against Pell, since Shal really went out of his way to hit him near that area, despite having the option to pierce Pell between his segmented joints. This, paired with the fact that he has only 2 needles at his disposal, one of which is essentially a failsafe and thus isn't really intended to be used on enemies, makes it extremely unwieldy to use in combat against an equal, especially if they have info on how it works, such as our hypothetical combatant would. This makes the offensive application of Black Voice nigh unusable in practical terms. Shal's aforementioned failsafe and trump card very much is, though. By piercing himself anywhere on his person with one of his 2 needles, he can activate Black Voice's autopilot mode, thereby receiving a huge manipulation facilitated enhancement-based boost to his physical stats and aura output. While it's difficult to gauge since we've only seen him use it once and against opponents most PT members wouldn't really struggle with, considering how casually he obliterated the bulky Pell, I could definitely see Shal holding his own against Uvo in a straight-up brawl for a little while. The emphasis is on the little while, though, since after a few seconds of usage he felt sore and tired, remarking that he wouldn't be able to move much for the following 2 or 3 days. Regardless of this physical toll stemming from a limitation or simply being a consequence of pushing his enhancement capability far beyond its limits, if a few seconds of usage caused 2 or 3 days of muscle soreness and reduced movement, a few minutes of usage would probably just rip his body apart. And even that may be highballing the duration he can realistically sustain it. Nonetheless, I suspect that the mode is deliberately designed to take by surprise and quickly overwhelm opponents who may have grown complacent, thinking they have the poor, needleless manipulator on the ropes. Unfortunately for Shal, our imagined challenger has full info on his abilities as mentioned. With that said, how does one go about countering Shalnark? As usual, an enhancement-based blitzer would stand a good chance of ending on the spot a Shalnark without his needles in hand. competent. However, that's boring, and there's always the risk of Shal managing to activate autopilot mode, at which point our Blitzer would be in serious trouble. With that in mind, there are two basic ways to handle Shal. The first is to neutralize his ability to use his needles. Here, the usual suspects make their appearance, the likes of Hisoka's bungee gum, Machi's threads, Moral's deep purple, and so on. But, and this is going to be a pattern this episode, the best and funniest way to go about it is by sucking them in with Blinky. They are physical objects, and if you have info on what Shal's using as his manipulation medium, you can end the fight before it starts. What's he going to do then? Throw his phone at you? The same phone he was worried would break by getting tossed around in Yorknew? I think not. Since we are borrowing Shizuku's Blinky, we're also borrowing her category of conjuration. Therefore, it'd be unreasonable to assume our imagined combatant could significantly outstat Shal in physical terms. However, it wouldn't be at all unreasonable to assume that he's more competent in terms of pure combat prowess, since this is an area Shal very much lacked in for someone in his proficiency bracket. As such, a few hits from Blinky and some excessive bloodletting is all that our challenger would need to finish the job. The next way to deal with Shal is, potentially equally as hilarious. I am really not trying to make a joke out of him, it's just that his counters are, well, kind of scummy and therefore funny. The other method for defeating Shal is by, dipping out. Yup. See, it's unclear what would happen once autopilot mode is activated if Shal's enemies suddenly disappeared. His instructions while in it are to identify and neutralize all threats in the vicinity. But what would happen if an enemy, perhaps using Nov's hide and seek, suddenly disappeared? Would he just stand there or maybe even run around in an attempt to find them until he overexerted himself and collapsed? Or would the mode turn off after assessing that no threats are present in the immediate vicinity? Either option is essentially a death sentence for Shal, since he'd either die of overexertion or be returned to normal, sore and with no recollection of what happened, giving our combatant the perfect opportunity to end him. Any emission-based transpositioning, extra-spatial transpositioning, or matter-phasing Hatsu would do the trick. Now, for the sake of completeness, I should mention that we don't know whether autopilot mode only works as the ultimate offensive trump card, or whether it can also have other uses, such as facilitating escape. As in, is autopilot mode always instilled with the same instruction of neutralizing all hostiles in the vicinity, or can it be imbued with other orders such as escape from all hostiles in the vicinity? While I doubt that's the case, it's not impossible, and if so, taking away or neutralizing Shal's needle-like antennae would be the better tactic for defeating him. I just now realized I accidentally left 3 goddamned manipulators for this episode. My bad. Let's switch things up and cover Best Girl Machi Komacine next. Potentially surprising to some of you, but Machi is most likely the physically strongest character we're covering today, being ranked 6 strength-wise among the spiders. I mean, she tanked a blow from Killua meant to kill just by reinforcing and flexing her abs. Need I say more? I'm not going to, since I'm worried where my mind would take me, but I could. I very much could. Her impressive strength and durability are accounted for by her status as an enhancement midpoint transmuter, i.e. a transmuter who's able to learn and acquire enhancement skills and techniques at the same rate as transmutation ones. This makes sense considering her Hatsu is in part reliant on her strength. Speaking of, Machi's ability involves shaping her aura into a fine thread-like shape with which she can do any number of things. I've talked about her Hatsu a few times by now, but especially focused on it in the top 7 most versatile Nen abilities video, where her threads got her 6th place. Restraining, choking, puppeteering, trap making, suturing wounds, and even reattaching limbs are all within the ability's purview. So, how in the world do we go about countering her? This is where I have to admit that I'm having the same kind of issue I did with Franklin. Both of their kits are well-rounded and don't really lend themselves to any hard counters. My first intuition was unsurprisingly at this point, go with a Nobunaga-esque swordsman, since threads should be susceptible to being cut. However, her threads are explicitly stated to be cutting resistant. This kind of counterintuitive effect, such as moral smoke forming underwater or solidifying, for example, shouldn't be possible without sufficient limitations. As such, I believe that just like the strength of her threads is inversely proportional to their length, so does their cutting resistance scale in the same way. As in, while a swordmaster like Nobunaga may not be able to cut, let's say a 20 centimeter thread, i.e. about 9 inches in freedom units, he absolutely should be able to cut any thread longer than that, since scaling-wise, it would make absolutely no sense for him not to. This is of course unless Machi is under some strong limitation we've not been made aware of, which, while doubtful, is possible. In any case, cutting, while a potential option, isn't the most optimal one, considering it was established that threads are cutting resistant. So, after thinking on it longer than you'd probably guess, the rest of the script is already written at this point. I had an easier time coming up with counters to Chrollo than Machi. I've decided to go with none other than Goreinu's Obsidian and Alabaster Sages. The Alabaster Sage is able to switch places with Goreinu, while the Obsidian Sage can do so with a near enough opponent. This is relevant because, as established, Machi's threads lose potency the longer they are, and being able to effectively control the distance between yourself and the opponent would work great against her. If she manages to get a hold of our hypothetical challenger, who, since he scales with Machi, would be significantly above Goreinu in terms of Nen proficiency and physical stats, he'd be able to simply switch either himself or her with one of the sages, thereby either freeing himself from her threads or weakening them enough by gaining distance to allow him to break free. As an emitter with the same 80% affinity for enhancement Machi has, our challenger, working in tandem with his 2 Nen beasts, should be able to counter Machi's skillset to achieve a decisive win. Also, I didn't think it was worth mentioning, but I'll do so nonetheless, just in case. Escape wouldn't be possible for Machi due to our challenger's teleportation ability. I don't think that point requires more elaboration, so let's move on. Well, I hope you enjoyed that transmutation interlude, cause we're back to manipulation. Let's now counter the most loving and well-adjusted Oni-san around, Illumi Zoldyck. Illumi is technically the heir to the Zoldyck family and a full-fledged Zoldyck assassin, which already entails too many skills, resistances, and full-on powers for me to list. If he has the initiative in a fight, his target is fighting at a disadvantage so severe, it's almost entirely unfair. Thankfully, it's our challenger that has the initiative advantage and not vice versa. So, in terms of physical stats, Illumi's a bit of a pain to pinpoint. He's a Zoldyck, so he's assuredly undergone the absurd conditioning and strength training needed to graduate from the Zoldyck School of Homicidal Arts. Killua was absurdly strong even at 12 years old, so it makes sense that Illumi would significantly outscale him. Despite this, there's quite a few reasons to think that strength and durability are not Illumi's strong points. First, a particularly nettled but nonetheless pre-Nen awakened Gon managed to break his arm. Second, he is a manipulator with a less than ideal proficiency in enhancement. Third, he doesn't really look particularly swole, and while that's not the best indication of strength in Hunter x Hunter, it is an indication. The 4 buffest and biggest Troupe members are also the strongest, for example. And 4, we've never actually seen him fight in melee. Now, this of course doesn't mean that he can't, but him choosing not to can serve to reflect his skill set and area of focus. Instead, stealth, speed, and accuracy are more likely to be his primary domains of focus. Considering this, if I had to slot him in the Troupe's arm wrestling rankings, I'd put him either at or maybe just slightly above Bonolenov's level, meaning that he'd take up the new rank 8 spot between Chrollo and Bono, who'd be bumped down to 9th. As such, I do think that unlike someone like Killua, who while retaining his assassin skill set, has become a phenomenal full-on head-to-head brawler, Illumi may lack the capacity to engage an opponent that is his equal under the same circumstances. This means that our hypothetical challenger having the initiative advantage is a more significant perk than in many other matchups. This is especially true since when facing a competent opponent, Illumi's usual tactic is to amass a legion of needlemen to surround and overwhelm with. Speaking of, similar to Shalnark, Illumi's unnamed Hatsu allows him to coercively take control of anyone whose head he's pierced with his needles. It's been implied that he has different types of needles at his disposal, and that the people he pierces with only a single special needle are either more powerful or responsive compared to the ones pierced with multiple needles. Nonetheless, neither this nor his face-changing capabilities are that relevant considering he doesn't have prep time. All our challenger needs to be wary of is getting pierced himself and allowing him to either escape or amass a needleman army. So, what would be the perfect counter against Illumi's skill set? As always, there are a few options. One would be a Hatsu like Razor's Devils. Since they're aura constructs, Illumi wouldn't be able to take control of them, and an emitter using such an ability would be able to stay away by attacking from afar and using the devils for cover. Another would be Hisoka's Bungee Gum. He's already proven that it's extremely effective at blocking projectiles, and his mobility with it would make him an insanely difficult target. However, the best way to go about dealing with Illumi while having the initiative advantage is, of course, by sucking in his needles with Blinky, cause the needles are physical. I'm mostly kidding this time. He's got way too many of them, and he'd definitely be able to either move away or grab a number of them prior to them getting sucked in. As I said, speed and accuracy are his shtick. The actual best way to go about it is through Shalnark's autopilot mode. In this way, our challenger would combine two of the best tactics for dealing with Illumi. First, overwhelming him with sheer power and speed while giving no room for reprieve. As established, while he is above average in speed for his proficiency bracket, he is among the less durable characters in it. Also, please note that our challenger scales with Illumi, and I can only imagine how much more powerful, faster, and precise Shal's autopilot mode would be if he had Illumi's level of skill and Nen proficiency. The second is by making sure he can't be manipulated by Illumi, which autopilot mode accomplishes by default. Note that, at least in the process of creating the needleman requiring a single special needle, Illumi doesn't actually kill his victims, but forcefully imbues them with aura, thereby forcing them to obey his commands, while removing any and all inhibitions they may have had regarding their own safety or well-being, with most ending up either crippled due to the violent opening of their aura nodes, or dead due to overexerting themselves, or as a consequence of putting themselves in perilous situations in order to fulfill Illumi's commands. So, even if Illumi did somehow pierce our challenger's head in an attempt to take control of him, that wouldn't kill him. As such, just like Shal himself hadn't realized his opponent was being manipulated, Illumi may make the same mistake he did. And even if he did realize beforehand, an Illumi incapable of taking control of his opponent or having enough of a reprieve to fall back and amass an army would be overwhelmed by our plus ultra Vogan. Last and the very opposite of least, we have the big boss himself, Chrollo Lucilfer. I'd say Chrollo needs a little introduction, but just to be on the safe side, I should contextualize just how I view him. So, first and foremost, Chrollo is ranked 7th in terms of pure physical strength among the troupe, putting him smack dab in the middle of the original members we were introduced to. Now, there was that statement from Silva that Chrollo had gotten physically stronger compared to their last bout a few years back. But since we can't be sure just how up to date the arm wrestling list is, I'll tentatively take it as accurate, but will err on the side of him indeed being physically stronger than it shows. Now, there's one important thing we need to get out of the way. Until directly stated, or at least heavily implied otherwise, I'm sticking with the interpretation that as a specialist, Chrollo has a 100% affinity for all categories, and is only bound by his level of talent and time to train in the various categories. In other words, he experiences no diminishing returns when he learns skills inherent to other categories. The most important for this section, as you might have guessed, is enhancement. Technically, if he were to go all in it, Chrollo could be a match for Uvo in one-on-one combat. However, as it stands, his physical constitution, time, and skill points, let's call them, invested in enhancement pale in comparison to Uvo's own. As such, while he may be ranked 7th, in practice his speed, strength, and durability should be at the level of those 1 or 2 spots above him, such as Machi or maybe even Phaeton. This because the arm wrestling rankings obviously only incorporated pure physical strength and not Nen. Otherwise, there's no way in hell Nobu would be ranked as low as he is. Chrollo's fight against Zoldyck, which I've mentioned in this context numerous times by now, speaks for itself. My man was able to tank and dodge 2 Zoldycks at once, while still apparently having held back a bit. Taken as a purely combat feat, it's one of the best in the whole damn series. Despite his physical prowess, however, I should emphasize that he does primarily rely on his Hatsu to wage battle when fighting a serious opponent. And while his physical stats and pure fighting prowess are definitely above what his arm wrestling rank would indicate, it's still not enough to bridge the gap between him and the more physically gifted combatants in his proficiency bracket, such as Hisoka, as evident from Chrollo's decision to not engage him in direct fisticuffs under any circumstance in order to guarantee a win, instead opting for Swarm and Storm paired with hit-and-run tactics. Now, his Hatsu, Bandit Secret, I don't think requires a prolonged introduction. Upon fulfilling certain conditions, he can steal another Nen user's Hatsu, which, quite frankly, isn't really relevant for us now. What is relevant is the fact that he can freely use not 1, but 2 of his stolen Hatsu at once, thanks to his newly developed bookmark, which again he seemingly developed specifically to fight Hisoka. This has also forced him to abide by additional bothersome limitations, as he put it, but we haven't really been told as to what they are. Perhaps his repertoire of abilities was reduced, or he had to give up certain high-level Hatsu, and now has to fulfill the condition of stealing a national-level treasure in order to be able to acquire such abilities again. There's also the possibility that he now has to at least try and explain his abilities to the opponent he plans to use his bookmark against. Whatever the case may be, I think it's fair to say we haven't seen half of the abilities he has access to, meaning that we wouldn't be able to properly evaluate him under normal circumstances. But there is a way around that. So, how do we go about countering Hunter x Hunter's equivalent of Batman with superpowers? I first had the idea of our challenger giving Chrollo a dose of his own medicine, by stealing Bandit Secret from him. Think an ability akin to Shikaku's Concept, King of Games, or Kurapika's Steel Chain, i.e. a Hatsu with minimal conditions which would allow our challenger to temporarily steal Chrollo's Bandit Secret. If Shikaku, a manipulator at or below the caliber of your average pro hunter, was able to develop a Hatsu procuring ability like his Concept by making it a counteractive ability type, and Kurapika, a conjurer, was able to develop an ability like Steel Chain which allows him to take away a target's Hatsu simply by piercing them with a syringe anywhere on their person, please note that Steel Chain does not require Pika to be in Emperor time, he only needs to enter it in order to use or transfer that ability to someone via Stealth Dolphin. A specialist of Chrollo's caliber, such as our challenger would be in this case, would be able to develop an ability to temporarily steal a single Hatsu from someone with even fewer conditions and limitations attached than either Shikaku or Kurapika, e.g. just being within a certain vicinity of the target and knowing their ability's name or nature may be enough to trigger the temporary theft. However, just because our challenger now has Bandit Secret at his disposal doesn't mean he knows how the abilities stored within it work, and attempting to fight Chrollo while fiddling with an ability you don't know is a great way to get yourself killed. The second, and in my opinion more reliable option, is that instead of stealing his Hatsu, a better way to counter Chrollo would be with a Hatsu nullifying specialist ability. We've never seen such an ability on display, but it's entirely within the realm of possibility for specialists. The condition can be as simple as being within a certain range of an opponent and maintaining a visual on them at all times. Think Eraserhead from My Hero Academia. area. That or a Hatsu that manifested as a zone around our challenger, which negates the use of any and all Hatsu, barring itself. In gaming terms, all Nen users in the vicinity would be silenced, while in D&D terms, imagine anti-magic field as a Hatsu. Since this would be our challenger's one and only ability, it would leave him with a lot of skill points or Nen memory to spec rather heavily into enhancement, and time to train as a combatant and physical fighter. Bear in mind, this effect wouldn't force those affected in a state of Zetsu, though that would work too, just would require us to take a slightly different approach, but would simply disallow them from activating their Hatsu, while leaving one's aura flow intact. In this way, our challenger would be able to overwhelm a surprised and Hatsu-less Chrollo and physically overpower the head of the spider. By either stealing or nullifying his Hatsu, we circumvent the issue of not knowing the full repertoire of Chrollo's stolen abilities, making this counter a comprehensive one. And that's how you counter and defeat each Phantom Troupe member. This series was really fun to make, and I'll definitely be making both similar videos to this one, as well as more Troupe-related content in the near future. The Troupe is by far my favorite group of antagonists in any series, and I could talk about them until Mizai comes home. Do you have any additional ideas on how to handle any of the spiders covered in this or previous videos? If so, feel more than free to share down below. I'd once again like to thank Kamaswami, Tom Gnome, Augustin, Nassan, and XGen8 for going the extra mile in supporting the channel. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you like more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, you thought I'd forget to cover him, didn't you? You dare think I'd forget one of the 4 kings of the Phantom Troupe? The Great Majitani! Of course I didn't forget, but this is a series about countering and defeating PT members, not taking on natural disasters. You'd have an easier time countering post-Rose Meruem than this beautiful blue bastard. Do better.